Hi, everybody. I'm Dan Wells. I write horror, fantasy, and science fiction, and I talk about games on the internet. Today, I am going to talk about Conan the King, which is another supplement in the Conan line. I also want to point out that this has been dyed black. This is part of a Halloween costume. I'm dressing up as Derek from The Good Place. So that's going to be a lot of fun, and usually this is very white and gray. Today it is very dark. Anyway, that's what's going on with the weird beard. But let's talk about Conan the King. So, this is my least favorite supplement so far of the Conan books, which isn't the insult that it sounds like it is, because it's still good and all of them are great. This just is the one that didn't work as well for me as some of the others. In one way, that is because its gazetteer is very small. Instead of covering a bunch of different nations, like the thief book or the adventurer book and things like that, the barbarian book, it only covers Aquilonia. And Aquilonia is kind of the default big fancy setting, and naturally the place that Conan eventually became the king of in the stories. Part of it also is just that all of these supplements are designed to reproduce aspects of Conan's lifetime, right? He served as a thief, so there's a book about Conan the Thief, which means that lets the player characters play thief characters and do thief adventure styles. There's one about barbarians, because he was a barbarian, so you can also be a barbarian. Same with mercenaries, the same with explorers and adventurers and all of these other things. Conan the King focuses much more on the idea that Conan was a king, not on the idea that your characters can become a king. And so, while there is one chapter that talks about that, and we'll get to it, and it's great, most of the focus is on how do you play in Aquilonia while Conan is the king of it. And as I've said in many of my other Conan RPG reviews, Conan himself is the least interesting part of this game. I could not possibly care less about where Conan is or what he is doing. I have never included him as a character in any of the games that I play. I am interested in the setting. I am interested in the world. I am interested in the style of storytelling. But every supplement has a little chapter like, where's Conan right now? I don't care where Conan is. He's not going to show up in my game. And this is the supplement where that is almost impossible to get away from, because so much of the focus is on Conan himself. Let me see if I can find... Let's take a look at the big PDF first. And then let me see if I can find some of this for you. There's a section in here where it talks about Conan. Let's jump in here. And there's a little sidebar that kind of describes, here we go, Conan the Problematic King. Unfortunately, introducing Conan to a Conan campaign can present many unique challenges, despite the fact that that's the entire focus of this book. Conan is like a singularity, drawing all things unto him. There is nothing which resists his pull. Unless one of the players is playing Conan himself, which you should never do because it's a terrible idea, he dominates any scene he is in, and if a player character, all others may feel superfluous. Even when Conan sits on the throne, he presents a potential problem for the game master and player characters alike. He outshines the brightest of lights. That's one of the most insufferable paragraphs I've ever read in a role-playing game. And who cares? Nobody likes Conan as much as whoever wrote this sidebar likes Conan. He's boring, precisely because he is so interesting, or presented as being so interesting. He can do everything. He has no flaws. He is fun to read about, but don't put him into your game. And that's basically what this thing says. Don't put him into your game. But then, like I said, most of the book is about what do you do when he's in your game. So we are going to go through this book and just ignore that stuff and talk about the good stuff. So let's look at this. Every Conan RPG supplement includes new things. If we are going to do a campaign that is focused around politics and nobility and royalty, what are some new character creation options? So, we have the noble homelands, we have noble castes. There's basically 2 new castes, and these are just options you can choose while creating a character. The new castes are estateless, meaning that you are noble somehow, but you don't have any land to go with it. And then there's landed gentry, meaning you're a big fancy noble person who owns a bunch of land. And so both of these, they're kind of opposites, but they are very interesting, and I like them a lot. Cast talents, they come with different things. And then we get to the stories section. All of these stories are great. There's a whole bunch for landed gentry and a whole bunch for estateless. Then we get to the archetypes. These are the closest thing that Conan has to character classes, and there's dozens of them, and every book adds new ones. And this adds the very kind of court-style game ones. So if you want to be a courtier, healer, knight, minstrel, noble, and they're all good. Like the noble, it adds, these special things where basically they're very good at talking to people. They're good at persuading people. They carry a lot of kind of political and social weight as they go through the world. So they're not going to be your frontline combatants the way, a barbarian or a knight or something is. But once you get into a social situation, they might be your frontline social combatants because they're better at talking. So these are all fun. Hooray for the archetypes. That's one of the things I like about this game. This says new talents. Command is an important one, but I'm pretty sure command already exists. But anyway, here's new talents that you could play. There's society. This is a really fun one to play with. There are new warfare ones. So hooray for all these new talents that are brought into the game. And these, of course, are based on some of the core skills. Then we get into noble natures. Again, all of this stuff, the noble educations, the noble court stories, all of these are designed to, if you want to, create characters that fit easily into this world of thrones and royalty and politics and scheming and that sort of thing. And that's one of the big, huge strengths of this book, which is if you want to do that kind of campaign, if you want to have a campaign in which courtiers and nobles are, battling with each other over political schemes, then having a thief or a warrior or those kinds of kind of muscle characters could come in very handy, but you definitely want to have this kind of character mixed in there as well. I also think it could be a lot of fun to have someone who starts off with one of these. Someone who is, for example, a noble who is accustomed to wealth and to power and to having everything given to them, and throw them off into a mercenary campaign or something where they have to kind of learn how to survive out in the wild and negotiate a world in which they are not expert. So anyway, these character options are all wonderful. There's good finishing touches, there's good everything else, so hooray for that. Now let's look very briefly at the Gazetteer. Don't read this. Okay, let's address this. On this channel, the only complaints I get, certainly the only complaints I can remember, very occasionally I'll have someone who disagrees with one of my reviews because they hate hit points or some ridiculous thing. But I only review games that I like, so there's very few people saying, hey, you didn't like this game that I loved. So the only complaints I really get are when I talk about how the source material for Conan is racially problematic, and it is like that's inarguable, and I don't know why some people are up in arms over that. If you want to ignore those, that's fine. I think that the RPG has done a very good job of overcoming those obstacles for the most part, and of making their game accessible and fun and safe for a variety of players, for everyone of every kind of background. And I think that that's great, and I have said that before. That said, every now and then you'll get something crop up like this, which is, it's basically a really backhanded slap at people who are of mixed race. And that doesn't really have a place in games. We don't need to read about that stuff. Robert E. Howard was an excellent author who was very good with words, but he had some very problematic views on race, and on mixed race in particular. And I don't think it's wrong to call that out. I'm not telling you not to play this game. I am, frankly, a little disappointed in whoever put together this particular volume that they leave in a paragraph that attacks people of mixed race. I think that that's really bad, and that they shouldn't have done that. I would like people of mixed race to be able to read these books without feeling attacked or undervalued. So there we go. And now I know, because I've said this, that people are going to come into the comments and say, oh, what? So Robert E. Howard was racist? Well, burn everything to the ground. Or, I don't know. People get very weird when I talk about racism, and people throw childish fits about racism being called out. I'm not telling you not to play this game. If you want to play this game, play this game. One guy even came into my comments, and I'm pretty sure I deleted this so you can't see it, but he said, oh, what? So it's racist and sexist? Well, I'm going to make it even more racist and sexist. And if you want to be a child, go ahead and be a petulant child. I would much prefer to live in a world where people are nice to each other and people do good things. So anyway, there's my little rant about people who complain when I call out racism for being racist. Sorry, I'm going to continue doing it, and if you throw fits in the comments, I will continue to delete them, and everyone will be happy. But, that said, dear whoever edited this book, please don't include paragraphs that attack people of mixed race heritage. I think that that is not a good thing. Anyway, let's move on. So, we talk about Aquilonia, and, there's all this stuff, Aquilonia before Conan, Aquilonia during Conan, Aquilonia after Conan. Conan himself, as mentioned, is the least interesting part of this game, but these sections are still worth reading because they give you valuable setting information. What is this world like? What is this kingdom like? How does it work? Etc., etc. And you kind of have three different versions of what that kingdom can be like. So that's great. Hooray! Like I said, the Gazetteer, I wish that it got into more detail. It gets into pretty exhaustive detail of Aquilonia itself, and that's good. We learn more about Aquilonia in this book than we do, I think, in any of the other individual kingdoms in any of the other books, and that's great. I just wish there was more than just Aquilonia. Anyway, we're going to skip that. It's good, and you can read it when you get the book. Let's talk about the events. There's a whole chapter on events, and all of these supplements have these. And these, of course, are courtly events. Intrigue, courtly love, war and preparation for war, and then events of kingdoms. How are you going to run a game if you are operating at the kingdom level, where you are managing entire kingdoms and nations? How do you keep that interesting? What kinds of events can happen? And this book does a pretty good job of kind of throwing ideas at you and giving you advice on how to run a kingdom-level campaign. Now, a lot of that material still includes, well, there's Conan on the throne, so that's going to be hard. You can ignore that. You can make whoever wants to be the king, the king. There are natural events. There are all of these cool tables for ideas, and it's great. And who cares about King's Conan's Court? Anyway, let's look at the Myth and Magic section. This one isn't as valuable, in my opinion, as some of the other source books have been. Because, for the most part, it's not presenting you with new magical options. It's kind of just describing different magical people or conflicts that you can throw against your players. And I don't know. I was not thrilled with that. Chapter 5 is Encounters. And this is basically the monster manual of the book, right? Every book includes a bunch of new people you can fight or monsters you can face and different things like that. There's Yothgar, the vampire plant of Yag, and I can't remember which story this was, but I do remember really enjoying the story. And so there's, all these monsters, and then you get into these like countesses and things. Countess Albiona is a person who is actually part of the Aquilonian court, and you get all of these people named NPCs, and then eventually, if we keep clicking through, we're going to find the more generic NPCs. Okay, so here's the full description of Conan's court, the Aquilonian court. There's Countess Albiona. There's all these other people, and then good data on who all these people are. So not only do you get all of these stats, but then you get this really handy little thing saying, here's who these people are, here's how they connect to each other. It's a really great section. And then just generic king or queen. You need a king? Here's a king. And then eventually, like I said, we're going to get down to the more generic people, but there's so many NPCs. This book might have more NPCs than we've seen anywhere else. So, Chapter 6 is Hither Came Conan. This is just descriptions of all the times when Conan was a king and nobody cares. So we're going to skip ahead to Chapter 7, Wealth and Holdings. This is where it starts to get... Chapter 7 and 8 are, in my opinion, the reasons to buy this book. The character information that shows up that we looked at, that's okay. That's definitely good if you want to play that kind of character. But if you want to play this kind of campaign where you are dealing with the movement of nations, 7 and 8 are where it's at. Wealth and Holdings, this gets into, how much money do you have? How does that money move around? How can you manage an estate or a nation? Things like that. And it really gets interesting, in my opinion, the way that you can put all this stuff together. Now, let's talk about Road of Kings. This is the best chapter in the book, because this is the one that throws Conan out the window and says, if you want to be a king, if you as a player want to be a king or a queen and rule over a kingdom, or if you want to be part of a kingly retinue for a different player, how is that going to work? And so this is filled with really solid advice on how to run that kind of game, how to run that kind of campaign. It talks about, what if everybody wants to be a king of a different nation? Is there a way to make that work? It talks about, having one person be the queen of a kingdom, and then all the other players are her, courtiers or her backup, her advisors. And it just gives a lot of really good information on how to make all of this stuff fit together. How do you come to be the king or queen? What kinds of problems are you going to face as a king or a queen? And how can you make that interesting and exciting? It's all really good stuff. Just really solid Game Master information on how to make this very specific kind of campaign lots of fun for the players. I absolutely love this entire section, so hooray for that. There are good things. There's descriptions here. You're seeing every single major nation in the world of Hyboria. If Ophir, what is their current state? What is their army size? What is their wealth? The highest, obviously, for Ophir. What are their ambitions? Who is currently the ruler? Just really great short tidbits on how you as a ruler can interact with the rulers of the other kingdoms. And then there's good carousing events. Then there's this wonderful section on kingdom management and factions. It even gets into like a subsystem about how these factions can go to war with each other. And it has what it calls war rules. These are not the mass combat rules. Those are included in a different supplement. These are more like, if there is basically these factions are going to go to war with each other. Let's say that there's a group of merchants and then there's a group of scholars, and they are both vying for political power. How does that work? And how can you play out and, mechanically calculate the kind of political war between different factions? This is really good stuff. And so, I said at the beginning, this is my least favorite of the Conan source books, but that it's still good, this chapter is why it's still good. You could jettison almost the entire rest of the book, and this chapter would be worth it still if you want to play this kind of campaign. It's excellent information. It's full of really good stuff, and I like it a lot. So, hooray for that. Anyway, and then that's the end. There's always the Chapter 9, Hero of the Age, which nobody reads. And that it's just a little kind of sidebar about a Kickstarter character that, yeah, it's not useful information. So, Conan the King. There you go. This review got a little more political, but that is appropriate, I think, for a book about politics. If you want to play the kind of campaign that involves kings and queens and nations and rulers and politics and diplomacy, this book is a great one. You will have to overlook some of its flaws, and you will have to decide for yourself if you find Conan as a character more interesting than I do, and it's entirely possible that you do. And if you do, then that information is in here, and if you don't, you can skip it, which is what I did. So, anyway, this is Conan the King. Thank you very much for watching this review. I am Dan Wells, and you are awesome.